May in 43, you are there on the cursed island of Attu, a speck of land in the Aleutians that soldiers dubbed the graveyard, and for good reason. Around you, only a clinging, icy fog crawls across the ground, suffocating. Beneath your feet, frozen, squelching mud slurps with every step. Inside you, an unceasing, primal fear. You haven't eaten properly in weeks. Your brain runs on emergency fuel, your blood sugar is critically low, your only sustenance a handful of cold, sticky rice each day. Your sole mission, hammered into your skull by propaganda and orders, to kill the American enemy with your Arasaka rifle, to kill until your last breath, to die for the Emperor. Then, in the very thick of battle, the deafening crack of rifles, the dull, ear-splitting roar of mortars, the soundtrack of your agony. You and your comrades ready for a final suicidal banzai charge, a leap into eternity. Suddenly you lower your weapons, your fingers involuntarily uncurl from the hot barrels of your machine guns. Silence, thick, heavy, it's not a commander's order. It's not fear, it's a smell, a scent that defied all the laws of physics and logic on that cursed island. This is a story of how weapons can be rendered powerless, impotent against an ancient instinct. By the end of this account, you will understand, you will see the entire chain of events, how a complex logistical operation by the US Quartermaster Corps, a meteorological whim, and the deep neurobiology of hunger achieved what diplomacy and armies could not. They stopped a war, if only for a few precious, impossible minutes. To understand this miracle, one must first descend into hell, the Aleutian Islands. They were rightly called the Cradle of Winds. This is one of the most inhospitable places on the planet where humans ever decided to wage war. Imagine constant, bone-chilling, cold dampness that rots clothes right off your body, and fog thick as milk, creating an acoustic void that drives men mad, causing sensory deprivation. Soldiers on both sides dug into the permafrost, breaking picks and nails. Death here wasn't an event, it was the background. And hunger was a constant companion, especially for the Japanese garrison, cut off from supplies. Scurvy decimated them in droves. This battle was so brutal because it was a strategic dead end. Military analysts in Washington and Tokyo cynically called it a useless slaughter. Capturing this tiny island would not decide the outcome of the war, but it became a matter of principle, a bloody symbol of tenacity. It was a war of attrition, a ruthless arithmetic of casualties where the only goal was to grind down the enemy's lives inch by icy rock. Neither side intended to yield, a true meat grinder at the edge of the world. But here is what makes this story truly incredible. Japanese military doctrine of that era, based on the Bushido Code, did not allow for surrender. It was considered the ultimate dishonor. Archives confirm shocking statistics. Out of a garrison of over 2,350 soldiers, only a handful were taken prisoner, and then only if unconscious. The wounded detonated Type 97 grenades, taking American medics with them. The remnants of the garrison launched desperate banzai charges, knowing they were going to certain death. These were men whose minds had been reformatted by ideology, soldiers whose basic self-preservation neural circuits had been literally burned out by absolute propaganda. And in this hell where human life was worthless, one side, the Americans, decided to throw a feast. This act of humanity paradoxically changed everything. Now imagine yourself in the shoes of another soldier, an American cook from the Quartermaster Corps. Your task seems absurd, ripped from another reality. A few hundred yards away, in the icy mud, sits the enemy, wanting to kill you. Yet your order is to roast hundreds of turkeys to the accompaniment of mortar fire, to boil tons of mashed potatoes, emitting steam visible to snipers, and most importantly, that tart sweet cranberry sauce. For millions of Americans, its taste wasn't just food, it was a password to home, to safety, to memories of warmth and family. You were to recreate this sacred ritual, this slice of the American dream, in the midst of a bloody nightmare. Why? This wasn't the whim of a well-fed general in a warm headquarters. This was cold, calculated psychology. American command understood that war is won not just with bullets and steel, it's won with psychological resilience, what today would be called combat stress management. For a soldier whose world had narrowed to a wet trench in the enemy's face, the taste and smell of home-cooked food were powerful weapons, weapons against despair. It was a signal sent not by radio, but directly to the brain's limbic system. Your country remembers you. You're not just a number in a casualty report, you're not abandoned. This unofficial Turkey operation was not for foolishness, but an act of strategic empathy. And here lies the astonishing paradox, one that would later be dissected in West Point lectures. For American soldiers, this dinner was a welcome yet understandable event. It was normalcy squeezed into abnormal circumstances. They rejoiced in the hot meal but saw no miracle in it. It was simply Thanksgiving in hell. None of them could have imagined that at that very moment they were deploying the most effective olfactory weapon of the entire battle. Olfactory, meaning it worked through smell, like nerve gas, but in reverse. A weapon that didn't kill, but resurrected. And it would work on those they considered soulless killing machines, whose programming seemed unshakable, and so the field kitchens operated at full capacity. Cauldrons smoked, oil sizzled on gigantic baking sheets. The aroma of roasted turkey mixed with the scent of sage stuffing and the tart sweetness of cranberry began to rise as a thick, almost palpable cloud above the American positions. It crept along the ground, heavier than the cold, damp air. Tables were set, but for the miracle to occur, another player was needed, unpredictable, uncontrollable, an ally who didn't obey orders. And it came from the sky, the wind. On this island, it had always been an enemy carrying icy grit, freezing the soul. But that day, anemology, the science of wind, became the chief dramatist. It had slowly, almost lazily, changed direction. It blew not along the trenches but across them, from the American positions directly to the Japanese, and it carried across no man's land that deadly strip of a few hundred yards an invisible cargo. Not bullets, not shrapnel, but the chemical formula of peace. The physics of that moment worked like clockwork. Consider, the American kitchens were located in a hollow, the terrain creating a natural aerodynamic corridor, and the precise wind direction, everything fit together like a perfect puzzle. And from above, a temperature inversion. Let me explain. Cold air near the ground and warm air above it. It's like putting a lid on a pot. This invisible lid prevented the aromas from dispersing. It compressed them, concentrated them, and directed them in a single dense stream, precisely into the enemy's trenches, and you must understand the crucial point. For a Japanese soldier, whose diet was sticky rice and dried fish, this was an olfactory shock. Olfactory meaning related to the sense of smell. This complex bouquet, roasted poultry, spicy sage, tart sweet cranberry was a signal from another planet to his receptors. It didn't just speak of food, it was chemical proof. Proof of the existence of another universe, one you had begun to forget. A universe where people don't hack each other to pieces on frozen ground, but gather around a single table. The message was delivered. It seeped into the trenches, into the damp dugouts, into the skull of every soldier. And here's the main question. How would your brain react to it? Your exhausted, hungry brain, whose limbic system, responsible for survival and memory, was suddenly subjected to such a powerful, unauthorized chemical attack. It doesn't ask permission. Your brain, that ancient computer of flesh and electricity, doesn't consult regulations. It doesn't recall orders. It simply reacts. The olfactory bulb, a tiny patch of nervous tissue behind your eyes, receives this chemical signal, and it's not just a signal, it's express mail. It doesn't travel through the prefrontal cortex, where logic, duty, and the emperor reside. No, it strikes directly into the limbic system, into your primitive brain, where the deepest files are stored: fear, memory, hunger, and safety. Propaganda says, they are demons, soulless barbarians, but your nose, the most honest of all senses, reports, that's home, that's a feast, that's warmth. And a short circuit occurs in your mind, what psychologists would call cognitive dissonance. It's a system crash, a blue screen of death for your ideology. Two files try to open simultaneously, kill the enemy, and run to the hearth. And the second file, recorded by millions of years of evolution, proves stronger. The enemy who smells of a feast ceases to be an enemy. Instantly, against your will, he becomes human again. And to shoot at the source of that smell, it's like shooting your own childhood memory. And then it happens. Somewhere along the defense line, one soldier, just one, his finger slides off the cold metal of the trigger. It is not an order. It is not cowardice. It's a neurobiological rebellion. His neighbour, listening to the unfamiliar silence from one flank and inhaling the same maddening aroma, does the same. An Arisica rifle quietly sinks into the mud, and a chain reaction ripples across the entire front line, a viral silence. One by one, machine guns fall silent. One by one, riflemen cease fire. The roar of battle, that eternal soundtrack of hell, chokes and dies. A silence fell over the Japanese positions, complete, ringing, unnatural. Ears accustomed to explosions and screams ached from this void. Only the wind continued its work, carrying across no man's land irrefutable proof of peace. But how did those who caused this silence, unaware of their impact, react? Those who sat at makeshift tables, passing cranberry sauce to each other? They didn't know that their dinner had just conducted the most successful and bloodless psychological operation of the entire Aleutian campaign. Now, switch perspective. You're no longer a Japanese soldier. You're Private Johnny from Ohio. You sit leaning against the icy, crumbling clay. In your hands, a steaming mess kit. It burns your fingers even through your gloves, but you don't care, because inside there's real food. You deeply inhale the steam from the roasted turkey, and for a second, you're home again, warm, safe. You raise your fork to your mouth and freeze. Something is wrong. Silence, not just a lull between volleys. No, it's a deep, dead, vacuum-like sitan. Your ears ache from it. Your gaze sweeps across the frozen faces of your comrades. The same bewilderment, the same animal tension, and the first thought that flashes through your brain like an electric shock. A trap. Why? Why didn't they connect this silence with their dinner? The answer is ridiculously simple. Neurobiologists call it sensory adaptation. For the Americans, this smell was background, not an event. They had been sitting inside this aromatic bubble for hours. It was part of their reality. It's like the smell of your own home. You don't notice it until you return after a long vacation. Americans, receiving normal supplies, couldn't even in their wildest dreams imagine this shocking, almost supernatural power this very smell held for those outside. For those who had eaten a handful of rice in icy mud for months, they didn't see their weapon, because for them, it was just food. And here it is, the main, cruel, cosmic irony of that day. The hungry Japanese soldiers, for whom that smell was a message from another world, ceased fire. And the well-fed Americans, for whom this miracle was just dinner, tensed up. They felt cold sweat trickling down their backs, anticipating an attack. What brought peace for one side became a harbinger of slaughter for the other. Two armies, separated not just by barbed wire, but by an insurmountable chasm in the very perception of reality. So, on Attu Island, an armistice reigned for a few precious minutes, stolen from the war. An armistice whose meaning only one side understood, fragile as first ice, inexplicable, an asymmetrical miracle. But in a world where the logic of war is a relentless clockwork, where every silence is an ambush, and every delay is death, how long could this anomaly, born from the simple smell of a home dinner, last? Not long. This anomaly was doomed. In the Japanese trenches, silence ceased to be a relief. It became oppressive, like a column of water. For an officer, for a soldier whose brain was steeped in the Bushido code, this pause was not a miracle, it was a disgrace. It was a virus of weakness that had infiltrated the ranks. The enemy had not vanished. He was there, feasting. And the aroma of home, which for a moment had turned off the killer program, now seemed like mockery. In its place, the cold, clear logic of orders returned, fingers, cramped, again found the familiar cold of the Arisaka rifle. And propaganda, that internal announcer from Tokyo, screamed in their skulls, "They are just waiting to slit our throats. This moment could not last," because the entire ruthless machine of war was working against it. Imperial doctrine demanded seeing the enemy not as a human, but as a white-skinned demon. Military logic dictated that death in battle was the highest honor, and momentary compassion was treason. This brief flicker of shared humanity was a system glitch, an error in the code of total annihilation, and the system, like an immune response, had to destroy it. The war machine demanded a forced reboot. And it happened. One single shot. After minutes of deafening, almost sacred silence, it sounded not like a shot, but like the cracking of the universe. It seemed louder than 1,000 previous volleys, a dry click that tore the fabric of reality. This was not just the resumption of battle, it was a conscious, willful rejection of the miracle. It was a violent return from a short dream of peace back into hell. The truce was killed. The program was reset. death once again claimed its dominion. The battle resumed with redoubled fury, with the rage of a person shown paradise and then immediately thrown back out. But something subtly changed. The very fact that it happened, that instinct proved stronger than orders, left an invisible phantom system scar. This story did not die in that trench, it survived. But how? How did this short tragic moment seep through the roar of cannons and the dense veil of military censorship to become a legend? Decades passed. Imagine a veteran, having survived the hell of Attu, sitting in his worn velvet armchair. Outside, peaceful life. But he still remembers the frost crunching on his greatcoat collar, the fog devouring the world's outlines, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. And most vividly imprinted in his memory was that strange Thanksgiving day. He recounts, "We never understood why they suddenly fell silent. Everything just quieted. We waited for an attack, but there was only silence. The most eerie, unnatural sense of the whole war." Only years later in peacetime did he hear the tale about the smell of their turkey. And in that moment, decades later, the puzzle clicked with a deafening sound. This episode didn't dissolve into the fog of war because it was too absurd to forget. It survived in scattered sources, like an anomalous signal on a battle's cardiogram, showing a brief but distinct spike of life. In faded American soldiers' diaries, where between entries about casualties, a line about strange, eerie sequence suddenly appears. In post-war reports analysing oddities in enemy behaviour. In memoirs where veterans tried to make sense of the war's most irrational moments. This story was not a loud report of heroism, but a quiet whisper of humanity that could not be erased from the unofficial oral history of the front. But in reality, this story isn't about food. The turkey and cranberry sauce were merely a key turning in a lock. It's a story about the colossal, deafening failure of the entire dehumanization industry, about how easily artificial hatred crumbles when it encounters something authentic and archetypal. The smell was not just the scent of food, it was an access code, a universal key to human memory. Memory of a mother's kitchen, of laughter around a shared table, of a world where the sound of a fork dropping to the floor was the loudest event of the evening. A memory that propaganda tried to burn out with a red-hot iron, but failed. This tiny episode, this minute's pause in hell, ultimately proved more powerful and significant than many major battles marked on staff maps. Because, like a surgeon's scalpel, it exposed the main nerve center of any war, the eternal struggle between the command to kill and the instinct to live. And now that all the pieces of this incredible mosaic are assembled, it's time to look at the complete picture, to gather these fragments of meaning into a single dazzling whole. So what did we see on that cursed island? We saw a perfect storm, almost impossible. Look, relentless American logistics, like a Roman aqueduct delivering a feast to the ends of the earth. The blind physics of the atmosphere, like the goddess Fortuna, directing the wind precisely into the enemy's trenches. The profound psychology of a starving soldier, whose boundary between reality and hallucination had thinned to a cobweb. And finally, pure absolute chance that connected it all at one point in space and time. Individually, these are just details, but together they wove into a pattern of such complexity that it seems not an accident, but a design. Let's return to them one last time, our nameless heroes, to the American cook, who was simply doing his job and unwittingly became an ambassador of peace. This anonymous Prometheus carried not fire, but the aroma of warmth, and he never knew that his dinner stopped a war, if only for 5 minutes. And to the Japanese soldier who, yielding to that aroma, performed the most dangerous act in war, he remembered that he was human. They never saw each other's faces, but on that day, olfactory telepathy connected them. It crossed the front line, the language barrier, and an entire ocean of hatred. And here it is, the turkey lesson. It speaks of a simple yet shocking truth. On that day on Attu Island, where ultimately over 250 Japanese soldiers died preferring death to capture, the most powerful weapon was not a rifle, not a grenade, and not a machine gun, but memory, a memory of peaceful life hardwired into our DNA, which cannot be amputated even by the most sophisticated propaganda. War is not only a battle of armies and strategies, it is first and foremost a battle of ruthless ideology against human nature. And sometimes, very, very rarely, nature wins, even for one short, impossible moment. And this entire story leaves us with one single yet poignant question. What is stronger within each of us? The command hammered into consciousness by steel and discipline, demanding that you become a function, a cog in the death machine, or a fleeting smell from the past that strips away all ranks and returns you, unarmed and true, to childhood? The answer, as it was on Attu Island, may not depend on us, but on which way the wind blows at the crucial moment.